Here's one from Patrick. Dr. Lustig, if cancer is a mitochondrial disease, why does the oncology dogma still revolve around nucleus DNA?
Well, so the answer to that is, it is a mitochondrial disease in terms of progression. It's not necessarily a mitochondrial disease in terms of initiation. I mean, we have DNA mutations that, it could be from reactive oxygen species that the mitochondria generated, but ultimately you have to change the DNA sequence in order to generate a cancer cell. That in and of itself is not a mitochondrial problem. It could be from a whole host of things, ionizing radiation, or toxins in the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So there are two phenomena. There's initiation and there's promotion. What I was talking about today was cancer promotion, not initiation.
We've got a couple on these lines, and maybe Brian could help with this too. So, dear Dr. Lustig, please explain how corn-fed beef causes NAFLD.
Sure. Yeah, I was waiting for that one. So, branched chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, valine. Corn is very high in those. Okay, it is not high in grass. Okay, those three, leucine, isoleucine, valine. All three of those are essential amino acids. You have to eat them. So the level in your blood is a manifestation of your consumption, because you don't make them, you have to eat them. Turns out that those three amino acids are a metabolic signature for metabolic syndrome. This is work of Christopher Newgard at the Obesity Nutrition Research at Duke. So here's why this happens. Branched chain amino acids is what's in protein powder. It's what bodybuilders use to build muscle, because muscle is 20% branched chain amino acids. You need them if you're building muscle. I agree, you do, if you're building muscle. But what if you're a mere mortal like me, okay? You don't need any branched chain amino acids to build muscle, because you're weight stable, muscle stable. So if you're consuming a whole lot of branched chain amino acids in your meat, and I can prove to you that this is the case, because all you have to do is look at Argentinian beef, Italian beef, and USA grade A 100% prime choice corn-fed beef. The Argentinian beef, the Italian beef, homogeneous, pink, all the way through, grass-fed. The US beef, marbled. We love that marbling because that's where the flavor is. You can cut it with a butter knife. Okay, it's why it's sold all over the world. Understood. But that's the branched chain amino acids driving that. That's muscle insulin resistance. That's intramyocellular lipid. And the reason is because of the corn, which the animal ate. So the animal got all these branched chain amino acids, went straight to the liver. The liver wasn't, they're not building muscle because they're sitting on a CAFO. They're not exercising, okay? They're eating all this corn, and the liver has to take the amino group off in order to metabolize it through an enzyme called BCAT, branched chain amino acyl transferase, turns it from branched chain amino acid into an organic acid. The organic acid enters the mitochondria, participates in the TCA cycle, overwhelms the TCA cycle just like the fructose did, throws off citrate, and now you're doing de novo lipogenesis straight to fat. And so now you've got liver fat, which drives the insulin resistance, which then drives the hyperinsulinemia, which then drives the deposition of fat into muscle. And that is why you have intramyocellular lipid. That animal has metabolic syndrome. And I can prove that to you too, because it only takes 6 months to go from birth to slaughter in the United States, where it takes 18 months to go from birth to slaughter in Italy or in Argentina. This is cash flow. Okay, so that animal is sick. We just kill it before it gets sick. So if you eat it, guess what? You get sick too.
Brian or James, because you guys do work with meat in South Africa, any thoughts you guys have from your work on this? That question came up like 3 times.
Yeah, well, I'm not here to argue with the good doctor here. I'm just sort of a layman in this, just exploring, doing my own research through observation and talking to, doctors, farmers and stuff. And I 100% support grass-finished beef, and 100%.
Well, there's a difference between grass-finished and grass-fed.
Yes.
Okay.
So I said finished too. Yes, grass-finished means in their entire life. And so I haven't looked into this, but I know that, I was just talking about Dr. Eric Westman that, reverses type 2 diabetes or puts it in remission and sees a lot of weight loss with normal beef. So I think there's a lot to learn.
Okay. For Robert, why do you prescribe, or who do you prescribe low-fat diets to specifically? What type of patients and what circumstances? Can you give an example?
Sure. So I had patients with familial hypercholesterolemia, FH, the original index patients of Brown and Goldstein, who discovered the LDL receptor. Those patients will die of a heart attack by age 18. And it turns out it's the heterozygote is 1 in 500. I am one. I have it. And so I've been on Lipitor since 1993, and I need it. And I tried going off it, and it went straight back up to 350. So I know that I need it. My sister needs it. My father had his heart attack at 61. His father had his heart attack at 44 and died. My grandfather had his heart attack at 38 and had 4 heart attacks before he died at 72. So I've got heart disease running up and down my family, and I've already had left main disease, and that's on Lipitor. So I know what I need, but that doesn't mean everyone else needs it. So people who have familial hypercholesterolemia need a low-fat diet because they need their LDL to come down in order to prevent heart disease. In addition, there is another disorder that I took care of called type 5 hyperlipidemia, okay, or hyperchylomicronemia. It's a relatively rare disorder, but in obesity clinic we would see it. And these people would actually have their triglycerides rise when we gave them fish oil. Normally it should go down. They actually went up. And the reason is because they couldn't clear their chylomicrons because the chylomicron receptor in the liver was defective. They need an ultra-low-fat diet also. So there are specific people based on their disease, and the point is you have to figure out who they are. I agree, for most people, sugar restriction will solve it, about 60%. Another, I would say, 10 to 15% need full-bore carbohydrate restriction, and we did that, and we could diagnose them from the insulin response to an oral glucose tolerance test. And this was, original personalized nutrition, and we were doing this back in 2005, before, Zevi and before, Elenov, and before a whole bunch of people got into the personalized nutrition business. I believe in personalized nutrition. I'm working with Ivor Cummins and several other people, not in this room, to come up with a method for bringing that to the public. But the bottom line is you got to know what disease you're treating. You cannot solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. And there is not one diet for everybody. I believe in low-carb diets for the right patient.
A couple questions on fasting and its effect on fatty liver. Anything specific?
Oh, very simple. So intermittent fasting, it's the de rigueur, it's the thing to do. I agree. If you have metabolic syndrome, if you have fatty liver disease, it is the thing to do. And the reason is because that fasting gives the liver a chance to burn off the fat so that you can become more insulin sensitive because you have lost that fat from the liver because you've given the liver a chance to burn it off. And there's plenty of studies, there's one in Cell that demonstrates that. So if you have metabolic syndrome, intermittent fasting is a relatively painless way of dealing with it, and I am for it. The question is, why do you have the fatty liver in the first place? It's because your diet sucked. If you fixed your diet, you wouldn't need to intermittently fast because you wouldn't have built up the fatty liver in the first place.
Here's a couple similar ones on cancer. Dr. Lustig, any experience of low carb or low fructose in cancer patients?
Yeah, like I said, MD Anderson and Memorial Sloan Kettering are doing studies right now. They're doing clinical research studies employing those in specific diseases. In pediatrics, they're doing it in leukemia, and in adult, I forget which one they're doing. I think it's breast. Very specifically to get the insulin down, to promote beta-hydroxybutyrate because it is a signaling molecule by itself that appears to improve mitochondrial function. And that's a good thing because you don't want those cancer cells to have all of those precursors to build new cells. So you want to drive that AMP kinase, and low carb will do that certainly better than a high insulin diet, which is what a low fat diet is. So I am for that. However, there aren't that many studies in the literature that say that this is the right thing to do. It's being studied. There was a movie out that maybe some of you saw called The C Word, about a French neurologist who developed a brain tumor and who was able to actually keep himself alive for quite a while on a low-carb diet. And we all know that Gary Fettke, who has a pituitary tumor, has been able to keep his tumor at bay because of a low-carb diet. So there's certainly anecdotal data, but to be honest with you, ends of one are not science. We need the science. We need to know who it works in and why.
All right, we're going to shift gears, give Robert a little breather from the science. Dr. Smith, James, are you referring to any particular studies when you say winning races on low-carb diets is less likely?
No, I'm not. So there are a number of studies looking at performance on low-carb diets. Is this on?
Yeah, I think it is. Can everyone hear?
Can everyone? Is that better? So there are a number of studies looking at performance on low-carb diets, but I don't think they really answer the question very well because they have limitations, and the biggest limitation is that the athletes on the low-carb diet aren't adapted well enough to the diet before the performance is being done. So I don't think the research is really out there. What I'm basing that on more is the fact that the people winning the Tour de France and winning, breaking marathon records, they're all on high-carb diets. So what would be really interesting, if not slightly unfeasible, is to take some of these elite East African runners and to put them on a ketogenic diet and see whether they improve or get worse.
And I'll tag on a little bit. I think it was 4 years ago I gave a talk on low-carb for performance, and as James was saying, it is that kind of fat adaptation, as they call it, and you'll see 3-week trials showing performance decline. So how many of y'all do some type of sport? It doesn't even need, you go out for a walk or run. Yeah, how many of y'all in 3 weeks do you feel like you're just rocket fuel, like you can go out there fasted and run for 4 hours? No hand. Yeah, so it took, and I had all of my physiologic data from series of VO2 max testing, and even about 2 or 3 years in, I was only, so average competitor on a high carbohydrate diet can burn about 0.8 grams of fat, oxidized 0.8 grams of fat per minute. So you're limited if you need to perform at closer to your VO2 max, you got to shift to carb. And after about 6 years, I was up about 2 grams per minute, and I was able to run close to 90% of my VO2 max while burning fat. And that's a beautiful place to be, because that means that you're almost like, you're at like 10K pace. You're at pretty much a threshold pace and still burning fat. And so you'll never bonk. And again, it depends on the event. If you're going to, go to the Olympics and watch the people running a 1,500 meter or a 3,000 meter, these are super high intensity events, all glycolytic type events. They're going to thrive more. I mean, they're like lighting matches versus someone who needs to burn the log. So it's all very nuanced. And then I think as a clinician, we have to look at the most important thing is the health of the athlete, not so much the performance on some single day event. And unhealthy athletes who are eating high carbohydrate diets, who have metabolic syndrome, aren't going to be in their sport very long, because they're going to end up, with cardiovascular disease. So if someone is healthy, they can do their sport. And so the first goal, when I show up at an event now, most people don't look like East Africans. So if the null hypothesis, the folks running a 2:04 marathon eat a high-carb diet, most of the people we're seeing, in our own practice who did a charity run, who are going to be running a 5-hour marathon, they're completely different subjects than someone who was running a 2-hour marathon. So look at the health parameters first. But and everyone's different. Everyone's completely genetically different in their adaptations. To the degree, like if you were a high school coach and everyone looked the same, coming in from summer practice, and you applied the same type of training, a third might actually do worse, a third might get stale, and a third might thrive on whatever type of program you give them. So everyone adapts completely different to, we have bell curve principles. But it's an important topic, because you'll hear things debunked based on what's called a straw man argument, which is an argument that's taking a stance that none of us are taking.
And real quick, while you look up the next question, my little n=1 story is, I did a pentathlon last year, 5 events. I did fasted. I didn't eat since the night before. I ended at 5 p.m. I did a 1,500 meter as my last race and came in second out of the whole group. And I felt amazing. And yeah, so I was also fat adapted for 1.5 years before that. But 0 carbs, yeah.
There's a really good study you could pull up. It's called the FASTER study. But what it showed were these athletes who had been low carb for about, I think it was about a year, not 3 weeks. Their capacity to oxidize fat on average was about 1.6 grams per minute, which is like not in the literature. These people aren't studied. But what I thought was more important from that paper were the lipid markers, inflammation markers, blood glucose responses, HOMA-IR. So these athletes, and they were all high-end athletes, the high carbers and the low carbers. So the low carb elite endurance athletes had way better health parameters than the ones who are just light matches all day. So I think this is a better side of the road to take. You can drive on the left side or the right side of the road. And for your general health, if this is a sustainable thing year in, year out, you want to keep doing this into the nursing home, try both sides and see how you feel and mix it up. Maybe this month you're going to go a little higher carb. It's called metabolic flexibility. Upregulate fat adaptation, but then the day you need to burn the carbs, you're going to do an intense event. You still got that in your wheelhouse, but this is where the money is right here, is fat oxidation. And go get tested in a lab. If you don't have a good lab, go find a university and sign up for a research study where they can actually measure this stuff directly. Question here.
I couldn't agree with you more, Mark.
Yes, Dr. Ali.
I just wanted to challenge Dr. Lustig a little bit because he's got so much influence that there's going to be a tsunami of people who are going to say, hey, I just want to eat only grass-fed beef. What I want to say is that how you use branched-chain amino acids depends on your insulin-glucagon ratio. If you have a healthy pancreas and you're capable of mounting an insulin response so that you shut off the glucagon, that branched-chain amino acid is going to be used, and it's not going to cause fatty muscle and fatty liver. It's going to be used for building new protein. So I don't know if the entire science is out there yet. And before we make such a blanket recommendation saying that, hey, don't eat any corn-fed beef, which is going to bankrupt a lot of people,
Well,
I think we should probably hold that as a cautionary tone.
So first of all, let me start by going back to something I said a little earlier, which was about sugar rather than branched chain. I am for dessert. For dessert. I am not for dessert for breakfast, lunch, snacks, and dinner. Okay? I am for dessert like once a week. And you know what? Make it yourself so you know what's in it. And enjoy it. And make it safe and rare. All right? And if you want to go out and have a corn-fed steak at Ruth Chris Steakhouse, and you're going to do that once a week, have at it. Okay? But that's not what most low carbers are doing. They're doing the bacon and the side of beef, at virtually every meal, and that if they're doing branched chain amino acids with every meal, then there's a problem. And if they go off their low carb diet, which virtually everyone does, because Christopher Gardner showed in the AZ study, it doesn't matter what diet you're on, 2 months later you're on the same diet because every diet regresses to the mean, because you have to be fastidious to stay on a diet. Now you're talking about having introduced carbs and sugar and branched chain amino acids, and now you're basically going to make that fatty liver worse. So I agree with you that yes, grass-fed beef is going to break the bank if you're going to turn all of your meals into grass-fed beef and if you're going to eat it at every meal. Now, one of the questions is why? And the answer is because we subsidize corn. What if we didn't? What if we didn't subsidize corn? What if we let the market do its work? What if we let all foods come to its appropriate level and we didn't subsidize the 4 things that are killing us, corn, wheat, soy, and sugar? What if we actually let the market run? Food subsidies make no sense. There's no economist on the planet that believes in food subsidies because they distort the market. So what if we got rid of all food subsidies? What would that do to the price of food? Well, the Giannini Foundation at UC Berkeley did this modeling and said that, in fact, the price of food would not change. The price of beef would not change. There are only two items in the entire food basket that would change, and it's corn and sugar. They would go up. And isn't that what we want? So I think that we could make grass-fed beef de rigueur. We could actually make grass-fed beef work, but it would require redoing the entire food system, and it would be basically it would mean gutting the farm bill. And unfortunately, right now, we don't have politicians who will even, approve a coronavirus emergency fund, okay? So that's the problem. So the answer is, yeah, I agree with you. No one can afford grass-fed beef with every meal, but you shouldn't be having grass-fed beef with every meal anyway.
Question?
Yeah, also for Dr. Lustig, and I guess I'm going to object a little bit to something he said. 14 years on very low carb, keto, we don't all regress to the mean.
We what? Sorry?
We do not all regress to the mean. We don't all spend 2 months on a diet and go back. But that's not my question. That's a statement, right. And I don't think you can deny that there's a room full of people that probably.
This is also Low Carb Denver, so you have to be pretty committed.
Yeah, agreed. So, but my question comes back to the grass or the corn-fed beef. Yeah, you've made the argument that they get exposed to a lot of branched-chain amino acids, and it causes, fatty liver disease and issues in the animal's health. But, we eat the animal's fat, and then we eat their, what they've converted to protein. Is their protein or their body somehow, what we eat, actually have more branched-chain amino acids than the grass-fed beef?
You mean, can they actually show that there are more branched-chain amino acids in the meat?
In the meat of the animal, what the human consumes. If they consume the grass-fed beef versus the corn-fed beef, are we getting more branched-chain amino acids?
The answer is yes, slightly more. Yes.
Slightly.
I forget. It's the International Journal of Animal Science, like 2006, looked at that and showed that the amount of delta 4, which is corn, is up in those animals. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Rhoda Reese. I am fairly new to the low carb world from a practitioner standpoint. So my question is, in regards to fatty liver, if it's identified early enough, how long does it actually take to reverse it? Can it be reversed completely?
Absolutely. So remember, there are 3 stages of fatty liver. There's stage 1, which is just steatosis, that is fat. There's stage 2, which is steatosis plus inflammation. That's called NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. And then there's stage 3, which is called cirrhosis. If you have steatosis, if you have stage 1, you can reverse it completely. You can get rid of the fat and never go back. And that's great. And that's what these kids did. And we did it to them because their liver fat went down by 22% in 9 days. Without even changing calories, right? We also did it in adults in 2 weeks, basically with the same protocol, liver fat down 38% in 2 weeks. So can you get rid of liver fat? The answer is yes, and you can do it rapidly if you change your diet. If you progress on and end up with inflammation, so NASH, that inflammation, whatever fibrosis has occurred because of that inflammation, once it's laid down, it's not going away. It's forever. So you want to catch this before it gets to that point. And once it gets to cirrhosis, basically you're dead, unless you have a liver transplant.
Thank you.
I'm raising my 7-year-old grandson who was born addicted. And I'm not one of very few. It's actually very prevalent in our society now. And a lot of these kids who are being fed sugar in school are not getting the proper, not only the physiological help, but the mental help, because I know my son and many other kids have the social emotional disorders.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many times he comes home with M&Ms in his pocket. So could you please tell us how we can either ourselves or somehow get our schools into the Eat Real program?
Why do you think we started that nonprofit Eat Real that I talked about? That's our job. That's what we're trying to do. And I wrote a whole book about it called The Hacking of the American Mind. We're working on it like crazy. In London, a colleague of mine set up a nutrition consultancy for kids with ADHD called Nutritious Minds, so that we can treat ADHD without medicine. Because in fact, you can, 24% of ADHD is actually sleep disordered breathing that's been misdiagnosed. And some of that is due to the obesity of metabolic syndrome in children. So if we fix the kids' diets, we could fix the kids. The problem is that that costs money. And school districts don't have it. That's the problem. So if you've got a problem with your kid, pack his lunch. Because the school is not going to change anytime soon unless we get to them.
And they reward the kids. That's the problem, is they reward the kids for good behavior with what? Sugar.
Yeah, right. I got it, because they don't get it. That's my job.
How do we get Eat Real into the schools, though?
Well, we're already in the Mount Diablo Unified School District. We're working with 6 other school districts around the country. Boston, Minneapolis, 3 in California. So if you can get your school district to be interested, we would be delighted to talk to them. And all you have to do is just go on to eatreal.org, and our CEO, Nora Latorre, will be delighted to talk to you.
I'll talk to her. Thank you.
Another way you can advocate against that is U.S. Dietary Guidelines. The new guidelines will come out probably within a month or two. But we're feeding kids chocolate milk and strawberry milk, which have about 6 to 7 added teaspoons of sugar given to kids with free school lunches. I just did a week-long project in the schools, and the average child in a Title IX school, these are the free school lunches, are averaging 1 at breakfast and 1 at lunch. So just with the toxic milk, they're getting like double the WHO recommendation for added sugar, and it's all fructose. So we're basically poisoning these poor children. And that's not a dramatic statement, right in plain sight. And of course they're hungry. They're gonna, if they're given chocolate milk, and we did the numbers, so 90% of the milk that was drank in the schools was chocolate or strawberry, because skim milk tastes like chalk. So if given a choice, so it's all crazy, but how do you beat it?
Let me add to that. We took the fat out of the milk and replaced it with sugar. We took the fat out because we thought it caused obesity, and we replaced it with sugar. What we did was we took the fat, which was good because it's odd-chain fatty acids, which actually have been shown to have a phospholipid signature which prevents diabetes, and replaced it with sugar, which causes diabetes. We basically took something that was healthy and made it unhealthy based on a precept that didn't even exist. So, we all drank full-fat milk, and we're still here. And, this whole notion that kids won't drink milk, so we have to add chocolate or strawberry to it, is just totally insane. But the problem is, we got a whole bunch of dietitians who don't know their ass from their elbows.
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
My question is for Dr. Lustig. You showed a graph with some obese people. I think it was like 30% of them who were not considered sick. So my question is, isn't this adipose tissue inflammatory regardless?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The adipose tissue, maybe like this.
Adipose tissue?
In these obese people, remember you were showing a pie chart?
Yeah, 20% are metabolically healthy.
Exactly. So my question is, isn't the adipose tissue inflammatory in itself in a body of a person?
Only if it spills its lipid. So each sub-Q fat cell has a fat vacuole, and that fat vacuole is coated with a protein called perilipin. And as that fat vacuole gets stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, that perilipin has to stretch and stretch and stretch. And it comes to a point where it can't stretch anymore. And then the fat basically dumps from the fat vacuole into the cell, which then causes that cell to necrose, which then calls the macrophages into action to mop up the grease, and they release the cytokines, the TNF-alpha and the IL-6, which then travel via the systemic circulation to potentially raise levels of inflammation, go to the liver, and cause liver insulin resistance.
So
The
only that
sub-Q fat is there to store fat, okay? But if you overdo it, it's like the bucket hypothesis. If you overflow the bucket, then you're going to have a problem. Then you got to clean up the mess. All right? So as long as you don't overflow the bucket, the sub-Q fat will be perfectly happy and not cause a problem. And that can certainly occur in metabolically healthy obesity. Can you push those people into metabolically unhealthy obesity? Absolutely.
So maybe there's a threshold, like a limit of fat that we can store before we start seeing these inflammatory.
Everyone's different.
Okay.
Everyone's different.
Thank you.
We're going to have to let Dr. Lustig catch a plane.
Yes, it's time.
Yes. So we want to give a huge thank you to Robert. Taking some risk coming out here, but privilege. Keep
Pleasure.
following his
All right.
work. Eat real for schools for the rest of your life. We had some we could continue here. There were a number of questions on the CGMs that came through virtually.
Maybe you can answer on the way out. I'm sorry. Have a good trip. I'll see you next year. Well,
Give Dr. Lustig a huge round of applause. Give him that. Brave work. Game-changing, bold work. Taking risks.
if anybody has an answer about the difference between liver fat and visceral fat, and what is the best way to tell
So,
that
you know,
somebody
not
has...
being a PhD physiologist, but brown fat is metabolically active. It's called brown fat because it's loaded with mitochondria.
No,
And,
I meant visceral fat
Yes.
versus liver fat.
So they're very similar. So the visceral fat travels with the liver fat versus the brown fat, which would be you go up into the northern tier Eskimos. These people don't look like East African marathoners. They have a lot of subcutaneous fat that's biologically active, heat-producing, non-inflammatory. So that's good. That's healthy fat. The liver fat and the visceral fat visceral meaning all the organ fat, that tends to travel together. If you look at CT scans of people that are just coming through, I mean, now in any ER, so I work out at ERs in West Virginia, anyone who has, a cough gets a chest CT, and anyone who has any symptom between, their lower rib cage, and their genital region gets an abdominal CT, and they all are loaded with, you see all the fat around the intestines, as well as in the liver itself. Really would you see, but Dr. Lustig's early slides show that in children, you're going to see it first in the liver. Within 10 days, you can see that, and then you can reverse that within 10 days. But I don't know if that helps answer your question from a general practice perspective.
Yeah, and what is the best way to tell that there is a fatty liver in your body?
Yeah, so as Robert's work has shown, and really like anyone, Dr. Worm, who was here a couple years ago, yeah, so it should be called carby liver or fructose liver, not fatty liver. Fat's the end effect, not caused by fat. So it is the fructose is the main culprit, the sodas, the juices, the smoothies, the chocolate milk, all the sweet drinks. So if you were to remove one thing, early enough in the game, that would be what you would remove, is the high fructose corn syrup.
And the way to diagnose it?
That would be for the fatty, for NAFLD.
Yeah, to find out that...
Yeah, and then you'd say, look, what's the response? Because then you can follow fatty liver. Get rid of all that stuff for 3 months and then re-ultrasound them. Check their GGT, check their AST, ALTs. GGT is a very sensitive marker that's very inexpensive that can be an indicator. If all these numbers are going down, that's a good sign. And irregardless of weight loss.
Well, I'm thinking of a person who is keto, has been keto for a number of years, and all those numbers look good, and there is nevertheless fatty liver, not a lot. So
I don't know yet. If it's too far down, like you said, stage 3, once they have fibrosis, it's not going to reverse. But if you can keep them in check, right, like if they're not on the liver transplant list yet, then you're good.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to answer a couple quick questions that came through on here about the CGMs, where you get them, does insurance cover them, because that seems to be a common question we get. So the Freestyle Libre CGM, so yes, insurances, and you have to advocate. So what I'd suggest you do is find a local pharmacy that does durable medical equipment, someone you know personally, and you talk to them and you show them the process of how to do the DME order for a Freestyle Libre. And if anyone wants to contact me, I can give you the forms that I use. So if a patient has type 2 diabetes, type 1s, yes, they're covered in almost all regards. But type 2, if you document in your note that they would benefit from checking their sugar 3 to 4 times a day, other than Medicaid, so Medicare is covered, almost all commercial insurances will cover that if you document that in the note. Now they might have a copay, and that varies insurance to insurance, but usually it'll go through a durable medical equipment order, similar to like a home oxygen or a walker. Some insurances will go through the standard pharmacy, but your DME person, if you get to know them well and help them with the process, then they'll be your advocate. And if the insurance company, what they do in my community, they submit them all through DME, through Blue Cross, Aetna, Humana, whoever it is. And if Humana kicks back and says it's a pharmacy item, then we just take it next door to the pharmacy, which is in a connected building. But then for people that just want to use it for 2 to 4 weeks as a self-experiment, I had a slide up there called GoodRx. Who's familiar with GoodRx? Yes, my slide up there, like 2 days ago, I just typed in the zip code for Denver. Like if I was in Denver now and just wanted to spend $60 to get one of these Libres, where would I go? And it pulled up number of pharmacies, $60 for a 2-week sensor. Now you don't need the reader, it's on the slide, so when you're able to download all those PDFs, if you have an iPhone 7 or higher, a Galaxy or an Android, all you do is, my phone's on the ground here, you just scan it with your phone, with the application. So you don't need the reader, you just need the sensor. So it's a 14-day sensor. And so many people learn a lot just by a 2-week experiment. And what I do for people when I give them, the first 2 weeks with this, I say, just eat what you would consider a normal, healthy way of eating for what you think is good for your condition. And I give them a little food chart and they log it. And then in a week, what have you learned? Oh, I learned this, this, and this. Okay, well, don't have them change 6 variables. Have them maybe change 1 variable. Usually they'll see right away it's the bread or it's the fruit. It's something, the whole wheat bread. It's the common stuff we always see that they thought was good, and they see it's like full disaster. Say, okay, well, just eliminate that stuff, substitute in some eggs for breakfast, not the oatmeal, see how your next week does. Don't make it like super simple, but give them ownership. Okay, what did you learn? What do you want to change? Some people, they love that experiment. They want to go do it 2 more weeks and do it 4 weeks. And then some people, they find that if they don't have this on, they just go off the rails. This is like a wingman, as we call it in the Air Force. It's like your buddy that's just hanging out with you. It's going to keep you from getting into trouble off duty in the club. It's like barks at you. But it's not difficult to get, you do have to advocate for your patients, because you always get this pushback, oh, it's hard to do. And then just go ahead and push through. These are indicated for type 2 diabetes patients now. But pre-diabetes and obese patients, if insurance might not cover it, GoodRx. How many of your patients spend $60 at a fast food restaurant with their family like more than twice a week? They probably do. So it's not that much money, $60. And it's an experiment for 2 to 4 weeks. A question came in about the accuracy. So yes, the Freestyle Libre has some nuance with the accuracy. It tends to vary a bit depending on the sensor and the person. So it's subcutaneous, meaning it'll delay 15 minutes from your capillary stick. So it's measuring a different fluid. So if you're kind of going like this all day, you might do your finger stick, but you're kind of raising or lowering if it's post-meal. So just realize it's a 15-minute delay. And it might have a 20 or 30 point, certain sensors, certain times a day, it might be off. The Libre is not to dose insulin on. It's to show you your trend. It'll still show you if that 2 pieces of Wonder Bread, which is probably about 60 to 80 grams of carbs, is going to take you, 10 grams of carbs usually will raise people 30 to 40 points who are bad type 2s or type 1s. So whether it goes from 100 to 220 or 120 to 240, it's all the same. They're going to see the trend. And that's what's important is for most of our patients who are type 2s who are not microdosing insulin pre-meal bolus, is they learn that. So don't get too tied up about, well, it's off my glucometer a little bit. Now, Abbott is actually very generous. If you feel your sensor is not accurate, you call their 800 number. I've probably worn 40 sensors over the last year, and if one's like wonky, is not reading right, I'll just call them and they send me another one. They've never questioned it. And so don't tell that to your patients too. Like if one is just really reading off, if you sleep on it, it tends to like flatten out, but then you kind of shake your arm a little bit in the morning and it wakes up. Cross-check it. But we can kind of go back to these questions here. But there were a couple that came up over the web here. Go ahead.
Question for Brian, which includes missing Robert, Dr. Mark, and James. For Robert's Eat Real and your sugar-free hospital and your sports 26 to 29er, any plans once the movie comes out and is well disseminated to bring it directly to schools and hospitals to educate that contingent?
The film, you mean?
Yep.
Yeah, well, there's a great program called FanForce that Fat Fiction is using, and it provides community viewing. So if there's enough demands, I think it's around 50 or 60 people, then anyone in the US can hold a screening. So I'm definitely going to encourage people all around. And Mark, has talked to me for over a year about, bringing it to his community in West Virginia. And we're definitely going to try to do that.
Yeah. It's like the Bug's Life analogy. If I could get all the power of the nurses together as an army, we could help turn this tide a lot quicker.
Absolutely.
We have about 5 more minutes, so maybe we'll finish with these 2 questions here.
Sure. This question is for James, for Dr. Smith. I'm translating here, so.
No, that's fine. Take your time.
Oh, yeah. So you showed us some studies that you did back in South Africa, right? We were wondering if probably you didn't, but you've thought of measuring oxidation in these patients, the rate of ROS production between these 2 diets at all?
Sorry, measuring rates of oxidation?
Yes.
What kind of oxidation, like glucose oxidation, or?
I think she's meaning like fat adaptation, beta oxidation.
So we've done that in our athletes, in our athletic study, but not in our diabetes or people with metabolic syndrome. I can talk a little bit about the athletes.
Yes.
So it's very clear that if people go on a low carb ketogenic diet, their fat metabolism shifts very quickly. So within a few days, their fat metabolism, fat oxidation will shoot up, and their carb oxidation will come down. So that's an adaptation that happens very quickly, but to be properly fat adapted, to be able to exercise on a low carb, high fat diet normally takes a few weeks to sort of kind of get over sort of initial fatigue symptoms. And people often talk about just really like improving their performance after, or feeling better and able to perform well after 3 to 4 weeks.
Sure. Probably the question is more regarding probably what the FASTER study found and Dr. Bickman's recent studies with mice, where he sees that there's less oxidative stress in these mice in the biopsies when they go on a low carb and they start exercising. And the question why we ask that is because these sports people tend to be more inflammatory. These sports are. So that would be an argument in favor of the low carb diet.
We didn't measure. Yeah, I can answer a bit to that because there's this whole world of people spending thousands of dollars on recovery, but if you don't do damage to yourself, you don't need to recover. And what at least as an N of 1 and other colleagues in the research will show you, you can look at the markers, but you just talk to the athletes who are doing low carb. The ones who are adapted well, who probably are genetically a good fit for low carb. Like I mentioned before, not all are genetically, some don't do well on low carb. But they can go run, a 50-mile race and wake up the next morning and feel fine. They feel good, and they can go do it again. So if you don't put any damage into your body, you don't need all this recovery. Because it's like burning gas or burning Tesla electric. The one has more exhaust, which would be carbohydrate, which would be like gas. And if you're burning more electric, which is like beta oxidation of fat, less reactive oxidative species through the mitochondria and the CO2 production. But everyone's a bit different. I notice I never need to like recover because you don't get sore even after you've done a pretty long race, on fat adaptation.
It'd be interesting to test that and see in a more objective way.
Yeah, Peter Defty, if you look at Vespa, Peter Defty is someone to look up. So he has, not clinical research, but he has probably 100 athletes on low carbohydrate diets. And, this is a cohort. This is how, the physiology world is 30 years behind what the athletes are doing in the field every day. I mean, that's how it always goes. So that Roger Bannister said that, with the 4-minute mile. The physiologists are way behind the human being. Learn from experience. Okay, one more question. Oh, thank you. They're great questions. All right, we're at 5:30. Thank you all. 8 o'clock tomorrow.